Now, of course, this, it's more complicated because the islands are actually older, but they're deeper. They go all the way, the height of Mount Everest. But this is an example of what you guys learned in school, geologic time. But what we have to take grips with in public policy of what is a 100-year event. Now, why I bring it up is because it's measurable. There it's measurable just like the strata is. What we're having to do here with these flooding events is understand what a 100-year floodplain is, or a 500-year floodplain. Is Harvey an 800-year storm? Okay. Well, I can only tell you that in the Bettencourt family, our interest in storms runs deep. In fact, it goes as far back as my grandfather and grandmother who survived the 1900 storm. My grandmother's family swam through the wreckage wall where their home was destroyed, and they got saved at various places, like at the cathedral that was partially destroyed, and etc. They found their home later, and I didn't even know the story till I was older, because if you remember, there was an old program at the Strand. It was called the Galveston 1900 Storm. It was kind of for tourists and for the kids to go see. There's a Margaret Rowan in there. She's my grandmother, and because her name is Margaret Rowan Bettencourt. And they found their home because of a parrot that survived in the attic, and it was still squawking after the storm. Of course, the parrot's name was Polly. I'm not making this stuff up, okay? All right? And they found it because the attic was the only thing left, and it was because it was wreckage, wooden wreckage as far as the eye could see, but they knew where the home should have been. My grandfather survived because they were on the second floor of the Strand when it flooded. He's the kid in the baseball cap behind the stretcher bearer, okay? There's an iconic photograph. So we followed this ever since I was a kid. I was told stories that got me on the Weather Channel because I could answer a question that the historians and everybody in the island had forgotten. Was when they raised the island 15 feet, they used hydraulic jacks to do it. And there'd be teams of workmen as well as mule teams and everything else. And so they asked me to come interview, and we were over at the Rosenberg Library, and they asked a question, do you know how they coordinated their efforts? And I said, sure, I know how they did it. My grandfather told the story that they would blow a whistle, and when the whistle blew, everybody turned the hydraulic jack a quarter turn. And that's how they lifted St. Mary's Catholic Church, okay? And the room immediately started bustling, and everybody was picking up papers, but it's an example of what we knew once that worked that we forgot. We forgot how to do it. But there was a family that had the lore that remembered it, okay? And that got me in the History Channel special on the 1900 storm 5 times. But more importantly, so what we have to do now is learn from these events, whether it's a 100-year, 500-year, 800-year event. Now, so they asked me to come speak. Cheryl, thank you. Clint, thank you for the invitation about the economic impacts of Harvey. And what I'm going to tell you is, I hope you probably haven't heard it. It might even shock you, okay? Because the comptroller's study in the economic impact of Harvey, is it negative or positive? Tell me. Somebody guess. Positive. Right. You're right. Okay? The 3-year impact to the state of Texas is positive by 0.8 billion. It's about $20 billion in loss, a little bit more in gain over 3 years. Now, why is that? Okay? Well, because it's really the tale of two cities. When you look at the economic impact, you have the flooded and the non-flooded. Now, let me give you an example. I'll do another question. Do you think the tax roll in Harris County is up or down after this flood? Tell me. Down. You're wrong. Up. 2.76%. Latest estimate released by the Harris County Appraisal District last week. Now, why is that? Okay? Right. Because here's what happened. And this is my opinion, okay? The actual number of flooded homes is far less than what you've seen in the media. The chief appraiser told me on Monday that they think it's about 70,000 homes. Now, there's an interesting story to this. because the county's flood control district and the appraisal district think it's roughly about the same, but they only agree on 40,000 of the homes. The other 25,000 homes they disagree on, because trained observers in the field see different things, okay? And more importantly, taxpayers report different things, okay? Now, who here thinks that the FEMA data that's being used nationally is 100% accurate and is inviolate and it's perfect? Anybody raise your hand? Okay, all right, well, it's not, okay? I talked to the chief appraiser in Montgomery County. They had about 11,000 FEMA claims, 10,000. If you take off the apartments off of it, they got about 4,000 that homeowners filed. His appraisal teams could only verify 200 flooded homes out of 4,000 claims. Now, not only is there fraud, in the federal government, there's fraud in FEMA. I know for sure, because my home is one of the few subdivisions north of the bayou that looked like Venice, but the water didn't get into the houses. We had street flooding, but the structures weren't flooded. As a result, we became target number one for scammers, because they would tell FEMA, I am Paul Bettencourt, okay, all right, I flooded. And because my wife was smart enough to get flood insurance, where's my $250,000? In fact, it happened so fast that we got the letter in the mail, and it came, okay, to me and said, we've already sent you $500, we're about ready to process your major claim. So I spent, like every other consumer, 2 hours on the phone trying to get through FEMA. Who here did that? Okay?
20 hours.
20, right, okay. I did 2 and I gave up. Because see, as a politico, I was smart enough to realize I could complain to my congressman, okay? So, and I know Mary Snyder's here for John Culberson, okay? Right. So I literally wrote a letter to the director of FEMA, because I found out who their inspector general was, and said, look, there's fraud here. You guys are about ready to process a claim. I got to the second level of FEMA, and the lady was astonished that I wasn't trying to collect my money. And I kept telling her, I'm not flooded, this is fraud. And she wouldn't believe me, okay? So I wrote a letter, copied McCall, Culberson, everybody in the congressional delegation, and they stopped the payment, but just a few days before it would have gone out. Now, so one of the lessons I learned is you can't use FEMA data because there's too much data irregularity, okay? False positives and false negatives. But let me go over some more of the economic impact for you, because some of the numbers are really astonishing. The last month that the state of Texas had a negative sales tax result was August of 2017. Now, it's not quite what you think, because sales taxes are delayed. You have the previous month, so you're basically looking at about a 45-day delay. But what happened since then is just rocket ship to the moon. 10% on average for 9 months, okay? Up, rocket ship, okay? So it's not just property values up. In fact, in May, we collected $2.76 billion. See, I love the serendipity of the numbers. 2.76% up on property tax rolls. So we've got clearly higher economic activity. And you know why, okay? Because when there's a flood, what do people have to do? Tell me. You got to rebuild. First thing you got to do is buy a car, okay? All right? Because they got to get their wheels back, all right? So, and you can see that in the city of Houston's numbers, okay? Because the city of Houston had a 5% increase in sales tax last year, okay? Well, no, sorry, they had a 1.1% increase last year. They're expecting a 5 to 6% increase this year. But they had a 17% increase in December in their numbers, which was really October, okay? Because what happened after the flood? People get their insurance, and what are they doing? They're out buying a car. Now, the reason why the numbers of the tax roll also, another reflection of it, you remember the early things, there was going to be maybe 500,000 cars that were flooded. Just like theoretically, there was supposed to be 150,000 homes that were flooded in Harris County. Again, the real numbers were about half, okay? About 250,000 to 300,000 is the latest numbers I hear from the Houston Automobile Dealers Association. And so when you look at the fact that the county is considering, the appraisal district, about 70,000 flooded homes. So you've got roughly half the damage we thought we took. Now, it apparently, however, doesn't prevent everybody from saying that Harvey is the second most damaging storm in Texas history, in the United States history. And I agree with that when the measurements are done at the end. And here's why. The night the storm came in, for some reason, Radio America called me. Okay, it's literally Friday night. Robert, remember taking the phone call. It's 9 o'clock, and they've got to have, Radio America's got to have somebody on right now, all right? So, and by the way, you can hear me on radio from 4 to 6 on Friday. I think that's probably where they got me, So I literally went on, and I told them that we were expecting 30 inches of rain, okay? And, of course, I was wrong, because the real number was 50, okay? Now, and then I told them this story, because Radio America's big on the East Coast. I said, you've got to understand what we're looking at here. We think what we're looking at is a storm hitting Philadelphia, but flooding Boston. That's what we think is going to happen here, okay? Because for us in Texas, especially in West Texas, people drive 300 miles to go to dinner or go see a movie, okay? And the geography of the storm is enormous, okay? It's enormous. You know, you go from Port Aransas to Beaumont, that's nearly 300 miles. So these economic numbers are astonishing. Now, that's not to say that Port Aransas isn't in terrible trouble. They are, okay? But the biggest, economic engine, Houston, which took tremendous flooding, okay? Believe me, who woke up on Wednesday or Thursday morning on the west side of Houston to the sound of airboats and helicopters? I did. I'll remember the rest of my life, okay? Because what that means is that we know we took severe damage, okay? Now, the truth be told, that if the 50 inches of rain fell on the west side of town and instead of the east side of town, the water would have gone around both ends of the dams and we'd be in a lot worse shape than we were, okay? Now, in regards to that, because you all asked about economic impact, you also asked about what about solutions. Well, on the 22nd of September, the 8 bipartisan senators that had coastal counties affected, that's everything from Port Aransas to Beaumont. There's 8 of us, 5 Republicans, 3 Democrats. We had already met a couple of times. And by September 22nd, we went in writing to the lieutenant governor with some short-term solutions, which we can talk about if we get more time. But I think it's important to talk about the long-term solutions that we advocated for. And in that letter, the first thing that we advocated for right out of the chute, 3rd reservoir. Now why? Okay, you guys are the professionals. Okay, I don't see the America's flood spokesman Jeff Linder here. Maybe he is, but okay. But the people that live through this, are the professionals. Okay, and more importantly, we've got a capacity problem. Okay, now when you look at the reservoirs, okay, why it got my attention because and I saw this down at Transtar and heard about it on many points, was the reservoirs, we almost had a serious problem. And to give you some of the granularity of it that may have not made the papers, we were hand measuring the depth in Barker because all the instrumentation went out. So they were literally using a plumb bob and measuring the depth of Barker to get the deal, get the depth, okay? In Addicts, not quite that bad because they actually been able to add a pressure, some type of sonar, and they got an automatic measurement up. But when they did, I remember seeing a picture of the control panel that controlled the gates to Addicts Reservoir. The panel was at 109.1 feet of elevation. Guess what the flood was at when it peaked? 109.1 feet. The water was right there, right below the control panel at Addicts. So if they had lost the control panel, they would have had to turn the gates manually. Now, in addition, there was a lot that happened that day, okay? And there's a suit filed, and there's a lot of things that are going on. But they did start cranking up the release. I understand it was by 10 o'clock that morning, on Tuesday morning, they were cranking it up. The public really only heard about it for the first time when Mayor Turner announced it on television about 6 p.m. But by that point in time, there was already panic on the west side because one news station thought the dams had broken and was basically talking about it on air, okay? But what it was a backflow, okay? Now, as the Corps brought up, they had authorization to go to 16,000 cubic feet from both dams. They brought it up to the high 13,000s and they stopped, which was good, okay? Because at that point in time, there was a concern about one thing that I heard about, and I believe engineering principle-wise it's correct, which was that the gates themselves were discharging underwater. And when you get an underwater discharge like that, and you guys are engineers, you know what that means. You're going to get vibration in your structure, okay? And there was concern that the gates would vibrate out or vibrate loose, okay? So, and that was a real concern at the time. Fortunately, that didn't occur, and they actually lowered the discharge by about 500 cubic feet to get eyes on the gate to make sure it was fine, okay? So these are things that you learn only because of experience. So, and the other thing that we learned, you remember that there was a lot of talk, I think Jeff had, and I really credit the flood control people for speaking to the public and informing them. Harris County Flood Control District did it when the Corps wouldn't do it. So I'm very proud of them for telling the public what they needed to know. Okay? Because the first time the Corps went to a public meeting that I'm aware of is the commander came to a meeting at St. John Vianney where we had 1,400 flood victims. I was there along with Senator Patrick and Chairman Joan Huffman of the Senate. And state reps, Jim Murphy and I think Mike Schofield and others. So they were talking to the public about what they needed to know. And what's important about that is I think a public policy concern here is that we have to have an emergency management warning system. Whether it's off of the gates at Lake Conroe, down to Lake Houston, off of Barker or Addicks, wherever we are in the state, we need an emergency management warning system. The public needs to know to get out of the way if they have to, if they have no other choice. Now, because it could have turned out very badly, the subsidence issues at Addicks reservoirs are enough to where the armored spillway will never get used effectively. It's too high now, water will just go around the ends. Now, another public policy issue, it's not in the letter, but because we learned about it later, is I don't know, see, going back to Kilauea, you let people build in a lava zone, they're eventually going to get it, okay? Because that's what volcanoes do. That's what shield volcanoes do. They ooze lava, and that's why they're 29,000 feet above sea level, okay? Or not be above the trench level or the plate level, and about 12,000 feet above sea level. So we know that's going to happen. We can't let people build in the pool zones of reservoirs anymore. That was horribly bad public policy. That part of Addicks area I represent, I've got friends that lived in there. They backed right up to the reservoir. There was nothing on their deeds that said they were in a pool. You know, it was just terrible public policy to allow people build in an area that you need. Because see, when bad stuff happens, you need that pool, okay? Now, there's questions about whether the pool, the reservoirs have silted up. I posted some pictures of Harris County Flood Control because they were out on the Buffalo Bayou, de-snagging it. I think that's very important. We had one hearing, I'll just tell you, at times my frustration level with the federal government gets very high because one senator from East Texas was talking about one tree and one stream and they wouldn't move it because it was in the way. And because in the federal government there's an alphabet soup of agencies that you have to cut through. And I asked the Corps guy there, could you give me a list? Because what I would like to do is just give me the list, give us the keys to the bulldozer, and we'll just drive it right off right now. Because part of this is we're protecting invasive species like Chinese tallows, okay? Why are we protecting an invasive species on a bayou that we need it to be clear so we can get the water out of the way, okay? You know, get the water downstream. We've got some real issues that is from a public policy side that we're going to have to talk about. And, you know, and it's possible, and there is an issue with silting at this point in time. Certainly there is. I stepped in for a multi-governmental meeting for my friend Brandon Creighton, who's a senator up there, who was overseas when the governor called a meeting on about 24 hours notice. It was a good meeting. I believe he gave out $3 million in money for a dredging study. He just had toured the area with City Councilman Mike Martin. You know, tremendous problems up there because there is a sand issue up there where once that sand is deposited in river sand, it does raise the elevation and future flooding. So they're looking at the San Jacinto River dredging, which I think is a great portion of it. You know, great things to do because we have to recognize the obvious. See, look, you're going to have problems. The question is, are they 100-year problems, 500-year problems, 800-year problems? You want to recognize those, and you want to build for a likely case, not the worst case basis. I mean, taxpayers, in my opinion, can't afford the worst case basis. Because you look back at the geologic record and you can see some worst case events that no amount of planning is going to stop, okay? But what we need to do is recognize it that right now, and the reason why everybody agreed on the third reservoir was real simple. We need more capacity. We still got room up in the Waller, Harris County area. The levee that was originally proposed by the Corps of Engineers back in the 40s was a good idea then, but it really was a levee to keep the river creek system from sheet flowing over into the bayou area. But all that land is under use, so it's in a different land use now, so we need another place to store capacity. Now, finally, this goes to a major recommendation that we looked at, which is the coastal spine. Now, since then, we haven't had a chance to talk about this in this working group, it was informal, but we looked at it, that there's also a mid-bay solution that they're looking at, and this is based on some technology from Holland, or I should say from Dutch technology, because I'm showing my 100-year-old bias to mapping, okay, for the Netherlands, where basically you got gates that come and basically control the flow in and out of major, in their case, estuaries and rivers, in our case, the ship channel and Galveston Bay. But these are all issues that we're on record for. And because look, I'm not advocating economic development, okay, by storm, even though the numbers prove it. And they prove it only to this point. If you're one of the people that flooded, one of the 70,000 that Harris County Appraisal District thinks that flooded, and you didn't have flood insurance, you got a problem, okay? Now, Claudia Ludwig told me the story. She's one of your volunteers. She's flooded 3 times, because she flooded in Tax Day, Memorial Day, and of course, you know, in Harvey. Now, she flooded at 7 inches, less than a foot, and 4 feet. One of the problems, one of the things of the charges that I've got, my committee has, is we're going to design a disaster reappraisal statute that's automatic, can't base it off of FEMA data. We're looking at insurance data right now, because what the appraisal district is saying that is if your home flooded by a foot or less, you know, you don't really have any damage. That's not a good answer, okay? I've talked to homeowners with 6 inches of flood that cost them $250,000 to get their house stripped and rebuilt. Okay, because it's not just when the flood hits you. Claudia's case, it was gone in 2 days. We've got structures that have been flooded for weeks, all right? And I'll get to a funny story about that at the end if there is such a thing about it, okay? But, so we have to do better at disaster reappraisal. It should be automatic. We shouldn't wait on taxing jurisdictions to do it. Spring Branch, Katy, and I think Humboldt did a disaster reappraisal. The city, the county of Harris, and HISD did not. So, but that's how we know about this data, because those hearings are actually occurring in this last week or two. But more importantly, we got to come up with a solution that gets the taxpayers to a number they believe is rational. Okay, and I hope the early reports of people not getting a flood reduction if they had less than a foot of value, I hope they're wrong. I hope that's what I was told. I hope it's wrong. because everybody knows you get a half a foot of water, you've got a mess, okay? Now, and in her case, she would have gotten a reappraisal, you know, under that ruling, 1 year for sure, 1 year for not, 50-50 on the other. The reality is, again, recognizing the obvious with public policy is the right thing to do, okay? Because as it turns out, it is the tale of two cities. It is the Dickens novel, okay? It is, you know. It's a tale of Paris and a tale of London, okay? If you're flooded, it was Paris. I'm not making any analogies to present-day Paris, okay? But back when Dickens wrote that novel, Paris was not an easy place to be, okay? And London was by far the better place. If you're not flooded, you know, it's the rear view mirror. It's like, generally stuff is in the rear view mirror, it's gone already. Now I'll give you a commercial example. There's a building out Memorial. The reason why I know about it, there's a nice restaurant that unfortunately flooded. I don't believe he's been able to open. It was Cafe Benedict. There's a big building that was flooded. It was going to have an occupant. The occupant decided not to move because they didn't want to go to a building that was flooded. Now they've got a lease, they've got sublet, and there's 10 million square feet of sublet in this town right now. It's an enormous amount. So when the energy companies stop paying that 10 million, you're going to see a pop in the commercial values because right now they're paying it, but when they stop, unless we generated the jobs to replace all that commercial activity, because 4 to 5 million of that square foot sublet is out on the energy corridor right now, because that was the area that was hit hardest, especially by the reservoir flooding. So I think from a state level, okay, where we have many of us committed to a third reservoir, we're studying these. The Lieutenant Governor has assigned a bunch of committees. We're going to have a disaster reappraisal statute that will be automatic, okay, and it will have a formula that I think the taxpayers can agree with, and I hope the appraisal districts too, because a lot of this is being done on the first time, and for example, Fort Bend County, almost every taxing jurisdiction except Missouri City triggered disaster reappraisal, so we're getting a lot of very good data out of Fort Bend about what that means and how to do it. But more importantly, you look at the record, you look at the geologic record of Kilauea, okay? We're gonna have these floods. The question is, are they 100, 500, 800? I'll let the experts in the room decide, okay? I can only tell you my last anecdotal story to tell you how crazy it was on the west side of town. You all heard of the Cajun Navy, of course, right? And they did great things. They came to help Texas Task Force 1, all of our first responders from the county, the city, everybody who was in this. And I want to make a point. It wasn't just government, it was private businesses. Tremendous response from church groups of all faiths and denominations. Unbelievable response, okay? I'm very proud of my church, St. John Vianney, for what they did, because they also mucked out houses for a long period of time out of the flood. But anyway, so it's, we're all waking up, we're hearing the sounds of airboats and helicopters, people getting pulled out of their homes. I had a kid on my radio show that led a band of intrepid brothers with a jet ski and kayaks, okay? He managed to, the two ladies with luggage dumped him twice, he managed to get them back on the jet ski twice, survive it, okay? That story, is one that warms the heart. So when I was thinking that we hadn't heard from everybody, I heard from the East Texas Navy, okay? Because they were mad they were getting left out of the action, okay? So, and what a Navy was a bass boat, okay? See, part of me thinks that we need like a monument to guys and gals in bass boats, okay? Because that's what came down to help us. That's what came over from Louisiana to help us, okay? They did, okay? So it happened to be that one of the guys coming down was a Senate colleague of mine, named Senator Brian Hughes, and he dragged along his state rep, Representative Cole, not dragged along their willing volunteers. And they had heard that I lived somewhere out on the west side of town, but they didn't know where, but they were just pulling people out. Texas Task Force 1 would tell everybody, where to go, cut the thing into grids, tell people to show up at MAP, whatever, put your stuff in the water and go get folks and bring it back. Well, they rescued Jim Murphy's neighbor. Jim Murphy, great state rep, west side of town. Mary knows him well. And because, and they heard that I was in the subdivision next over. So they drove their rig to the Bettencourt Marina and parked it, okay? You can't make the story up. And we got pictures of them parked at the Bettencourt Marina, okay? Which was street flooded, but not home flooded when they visited. But it was that type of spirit that we got through all this with, okay? The difference is that even the economic conservative in the room will stand up and say, you know what? After I see reality, okay? I know we need a third reservoir, okay? And I was proud to, you know, and to have at least 7 of my colleagues agree to that already. So that's what I think the byword is to understand, is to recognize it. And quite frankly, amazingly, we, you know, all the economic indicators that we've got so far is that we did as a society blow past Harvey on the economic impact. But again, the people that flooded, especially the ones without that insurance, are really hurting. And fundamentally, we're going to have people that are not ever going to come back to their home. Because quite frankly, if I was a little older than I am now, if I was 75, okay, and my home flooded, okay, the door would not hit me in the rear end, okay, selling it, okay? Because at that point in time, you know, quite frankly, I probably was there too long, okay? You know, and, you know, but those people have had to make that decision based upon seeing all their belongings stuck in the front of their yard. And what really tears your heart out is when you go see the photo albums on top of the pile, okay? Now, that's galvanized us into action, and certainly, you know, from the state level, we're going to take it. And I will end you with this. The governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, well, they don't agree on many things. For those of you who follow politics or listen to the radio show, they don't agree on property tax relief, but they do agree on one thing, okay? That we're going to tap the rainy day fund in 2019. Because I think, I hope, I pray, and I believe, actually, because I look at the record over time, that we've seen our lifetime storm. Because like my grandfather, he kept looking for the next one to come and prepared for it, but the good news was it never came. But that doesn't stop me from recognizing the obvious of saying the public policy that I'm advocating for, like a third reservoir right now. So I appreciate your time, and there'll be some cheap flights to the Big Island shortly. Okay? Unfortunately for them, but they have a great attitude, which is for the Hawaiian culture, it is Pele. They know she built the place, and if they occasionally have to get out of her way for a while, they get out of her way for a while. Okay, and we're going to have to, learn those decisions here too. But I can speak of no better group to understand, deep time, geologic time, or what a 100-year event is than the Houston Geological Society. But next time, I'm just going to suggest you have 2 entrances into the food, okay, instead of 1. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So we have time for one question. I see a hand raised in the back.
Okay, one question.
One question.
On the potential bond election, Paul, do we have any idea, other than the third reservoir, what might be projects that would be in that election funded by that? In other words, how is that money going to be spent, and how much money is it going to be? Do we know what projects and whether they'll be of value really to help make a significant dent, not just on a Harvey event, but really the Tax Day flood and the Memorial Day flood are more likely to reoccur, and with dredging and potential in Lake Houston and Addicks and Barker, where can this money be spent smartly? Do you have, from a state perspective, some idea?
Well, it's not a state bond issue, it's a county one. And County Commissioner's Court has already selected the amount of $2.5 billion. Now, I know Robert was there, and from published accounts, the project list will not be available completely until August the 1st. So I can't answer your question. I don't believe the third reservoir was part of the project list. I could be wrong, but that I don't believe it is, okay? Look, look, everybody has a public policy view of this. The election hasn't been formally called yet. I assume that's going to happen next week. I just wish, because this has been a long-standing public policy of mine and the Republican Party, others, I wish all this stuff would be put on November's ballot. Because we had a similar debate over a big issue. It's not, flooding. It was a pension plan in Houston. And it was a tremendous success because a bill worked its way through the legislature. And I stood up for two things. One, to have the public vote on pension bond because it was over $1 billion. And two, that if the pension plans didn't meet certain trigger levels, that we'd have a different plan than a defined a benefit plan, that we'd go to a hybrid plan and get away from those big budget busting defined benefit plans that have broken Detroit and Dallas and on the way with Chicago and Dallas. And that all came together. That worked very well. Senator Huffman and Lieutenant Governor Patrick backed me up on the changes. Even though the mayor disagreed with them, the bill got passed, and lo and behold, 77% of the public voted for that bill. I have great faith in the public. I want the public to vote on big issues like that. I wish we were going to vote on it in November, because I think that's a better public policy. But because I think that's the right way to do these big projects. Because the public knows if there's they can make a differentiation based on a good argument. And they certainly did in the City of Houston pension case, because that was a good bill. So, all right, well, thanks. Appreciate it. And keep listening. All right?